Today's meat fabrication is a butcher's block reserve Angus beef chuck roll, item number 5643208, and we're going to fabricate this chuck roll into boneless beef chuck ribs and Denver cut steaks. The first step in fabrication is to separate the beef chuck eye roll, which is this section, from the underblade. And this can be done by following the large fat seam which separates these two muscles. For those of you that are familiar with the beef ribeye, you'll notice that this part here connects to the rib. This is the posterior section of the beef chuck eye roll. You'll notice the longissimus dorsi muscle, which is the ribeye muscle, which runs through the length of the ribeye. You'll start by separating at this fat seam, and I've done some of this for you already, but use your knife and cut along this seam. Until you separate the chuck eye roll from the beef underblade. At this point, we have two separate and distinct muscles. We have the chuck eye roll and the beef underblade. And I will show you how these will be fabricated into the boneless beef chuck ribs coming from this section, and then our Denver steaks, as well as some stew meat and other ancillary products coming from the beef underblade. Again, two of these together is a Meat Buyer's Guide 116A. Once they're separated, I have a 116D chuck eye roll and the 116E, the beef underblade. Once you've separated the underblade from the chuck eye roll, you'll notice some very important things on this, and the things that you'll need to clean up. You'll see these cartilage markings where the ribs connected to the chuck eye roll. You'll want to use your knife to gently remove those pieces of silver skin and sometimes even some rough cartilage from the surface. Being very careful not to damage too much of the meat. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to clean up a lot of this heavy, thick fat from the top side, and from the bottom side, the thing that I'm going to want to do is I'm going to remove all of the silver skin, because remember, the silver skin won't break down during the cooking process. So from this side, I'll remove all of the silver skin and leave the larger pieces, if there are any, of some of the connective fat and whatnot. But I'm going to remove all the surface silver skin, if there is any. As I continue to trim the chuck roll, I'll explain to you the different uses that you can use on this, different ways that you can merchandise this chuck roll. As you recall, I pointed out this is what we call the posterior end of the chuck roll. This is where it connects with the ribeye, and you'll see the ribeye, what they call the longissimus dorsi muscle, or the LD muscle, which is the eye of the ribeye. This is the very end of that eye as it connects to this chuck end. The other end of this is connecting to our shoulder. And again, the chuck sits right under the shoulder blade. So my options on this are, some guys are taking the first section of this and cutting it into steaks and using it as Delmonico steaks. This is a true Delmonico steak. You'll see a lot of restaurants will actually take these, they'll actually take ribeyes and call them Delmonicos erroneously. This is actually the Delmonico end of the chuck, where you can call these Delmonico steaks. So we could use these as Delmonico steaks. We could use this middle section, probably about to here, for our boneless chuck ribs, and then we could use the end of that, maybe tie it up for a small roast, or we could take this whole thing, possibly cut it in two sections, and make two small roasts. They're actually calling this America's Roast, our folks at the Beef Council. What I'm going to do today is something a lot easier. because I think in our next video we're going to show you how to take these and really cook up some nice boneless chuck ribs. For the boneless chuck ribs, all I do is I'll start cutting these at about 1 inch. Turn them over. They make some really nice looking ribs. And you'll notice that what I do is I make an incision, and then I'll take it and cut each one of those laterally. Makes for a really nice looking product. Excited to try these. And you'll notice again, because these are coming from our Butcher's Block Reserve Angus, you'll notice the high degree of intramuscular fat, or what we call marbling, in each one of these. These are going to make for some really nice ribs. We're going to, in the next segment when we cook these, we're going to try them a couple of different ways. We're going to braise them up, some moist heat cooking methods, and then we're also going to possibly try even grilling some of them. And there you have it, boneless beef chuck ribs, taken from the 116D, or the beef chuck eye roll. All right, we've removed once again the beef underblade from the chuck eye roll. This is the underblade. You can see it's kind of a large trapezoid shaped piece of meat. We need to take several muscle groups off of this before we can get to the point where we're cutting our Denver steaks. The first one is really quite obvious. There's a piece of meat that hangs off the front here, and it's connected by a really thick piece of connective tissue here, probably more connective tissue than silver skin. This is where the shoulder blade attaches to the animal. And so what we've got to do is we've got to remove that completely. That would eat just like shoe leather, and that's going to be really evident as to where to remove that. So we're going to take that off. In addition to taking that off, we've got a piece of meat called the Rhomboideus, which sits right here. Rhomboideus is actually what gives the animal its hump on its shoulder, between the shoulder blades. And so I'm going to remove this piece of meat completely, as well as some of this fatty section in here. And what we'll end up with is a nice fanned piece of meat. You'll see we're going to clean up this backside as well after we get those two pieces of meat off. And you'll actually see these fingers here where actually vein trails, where the ribs, actually the veins that ran throughout the vein system, the veins ran through the animal. So we're going to clean this up a little bit, but we're going to remove this Rhomboideus, which is this large piece of meat here. It'll eat very tough, and we're going to clean up some of this fat and actually remove a piece of meat from down in here, and we'll get to that. Just to remember, as you clean this up, whether you're cleaning up this beef underblade or whether you're cleaning up the chuck roll, your trim, I always take my trim and separate it into two different piles. I'll put a pile of usable trim, which I can grind for ground chuck, and then I'll also put a pile of unusable trim, which is fat and silver skin and things like that, because when I have to calculate the cost of these steaks, I want to be able to give myself credit for that usable trim. Usable trim can also be used for a really nice marinated stew meat, kebab meat, things like that. Probably more stew meat than kebab meat, just because of where this lies. But we're going to clean this up a little bit more. Like I said, we're going to remove this. This is really tough. This is that Rhomboideus. And all of these have a natural fat seam here, which is going to be real easy for you to find. Real easy for you to cut and clean. Just get that right out of there. But again, that Rhomboideus can be used for stew meat. And again, that's usable trim, unusable trim. All right, when you're done trimming this out, you end up with a kind of unusual looking shaped piece of meat. But we had taken that Rhomboideus off, which was that hump, and that sat along here. And then there was another piece here. I'm not quite sure what the name of this muscle is, but this sat on the underside right here. So we separated out these three muscles. We trimmed that shoulder blade piece off. And again, these are going to be utilized for ground chuck or stew meat. So we're left with this this kind of strange looking piece. And as again, I pointed out where you can see the vein lines, these white lines where the veins ran on this. And what we have found on this for cutting these Denver cut steaks is we want to count in about 4 vein rows, 1, 2, 3, 4, where there seems to be somewhat of a natural seam. And we'll make an incision right there. And you'll notice that the grains on this run this way on this piece, and they're running kind of this way on this piece. But we want to separate those, and I'll square it up and start cutting my Denver steaks right out of that. Based on the size of your original piece of meat, these steaks will be kind of different in size. The ones I'll take from this side, we can take them and butterfly them and make nice little steaks out of them, or you can make what looks like to be little mini strip loins out of them. So then on this side, this is a little bit more difficult to cut. You're going to end up with some trim, obviously. But take this, and you can generally square that up, and then just start taking some steaks out of there as well. Again, these are your Denver steaks. Really nice looking little steak. So not incredibly high yield. We did a yield test on this and found out that by the time we had cut out our Denver steaks and we'd cut out our boneless beef chuck ribs, these two products made up about 50% of our original starting weight. So if I'm buying it for about $2.50 a pound, $2.60 a pound, I'm going to end up with a product that's costing me about $4.50 a pound, in that ballpark, as a yielded out price. Not too many pre-made steaks out on the market selling for $4.50 a pound. Again, these are going to make great little lunch steaks, small dinner steaks, just a really a nice variety of items that you can offer on this Denver steak. We'll be showing you in our next video cooking recommendations for this Denver steak, but you'll notice the high degree of marbling on those Denver steaks. Really nice product, and because it comes from that chuck, because it is a upper 2/3 choice product, extremely tender, very good to eat.